My goodness, we're on Wicca and Witchcraft for Dummies, Chapter 5, Part 7. This chapter's humongous. So we were talking about Gerald Gardner, and from his experience in the New Forest Coven and his own research, he created a system of Wicca, which is the New Age Wicca that we talk about. He was initiated as a priest in 1939, but he couldn't reveal or publish his experiences because of the anti-witchcraft laws that remained on the books in Britain. So back then, you couldn't even talk about witchcraft or publish it because it was a forbidden subject. These laws actually carried heavy penalties. They're one of the key reasons that the craft remained enshrouded in secrecy throughout British history. But those laws were repealed in 1951. So at that point, Gardner published two books, Witchcraft Today, which was in 1954, and The Meaning of Witchcraft, which was done in 1959, and it detailed the beliefs and practices of the craft. So he suddenly became a celebrity and often appeared in the media, touted as the official witch of Britain. For many years, he ran a witchcraft museum on the Isle of Man. So you can see how this would cause a little bit of a problem. By publicizing Wicca, Gardner violated the craft's long tradition of silence and secrecy, and he was widely criticized for that. Reports began to appear suggesting that the craft had survived in pockets and fragments throughout Britain, and with immigrant groups in the United States as well, each with its own beliefs and practices. Members of the hereditary family or traditionalist covens claimed that their traditions were as old or older than the New Forest Coven that he talked about. Many declared that Gardnerian Wicca was not representative of their own beliefs and practices, and a key issue was whether the question of the craft was a practice or a religion. So practice meaning it's a focus on influencing everyday events, whereas a religion is centered around belief in the worship of deity. However, as to his own reasons for publishing, the members of the New Forest Coven were growing old, and Gardner believed that they were the last surviving members of the craft. He was generally afraid that the craft would die out and all its beauty, mystery, and power would be lost to future generations. So you can get into a whole history of whether Gardner was correct or whether he wasn't correct. Some people feel he was telling secrets that shouldn't be told. Some people believe that Wicca doesn't really have secrets. It's just that we had to keep it secret back then because of persecution, but now we can speak out loud. So at the time that he came out with his book, there was a lot of propaganda surrounding Wicca and witchcraft. Books of shadows outlining the way to practice Wicca were actually published by people. So you can imagine how witches having their book of shadows published would be offended by that. Some Wiccans actually believe that Gardner hurt the craft because of his lack of credibility, as well as his insistence on things like nudity, sexual symbolism, coven membership, and hierarchy. So while all of these authors have had their credibility questioned, they at least have all been appreciated with the fact that they helped to bring Wicca back to culture and stop it from dying out. So you can believe how you want about any of these authors or their theories, but the fact that they're at least talking about it keeps the tradition alive. I am going to touch on Victor Anderson real quick. He's the Wiccan tradition that developed kind of parallel to Gardnerian Wicca, but it is different in many ways. His tradition, Victor Anderson's tradition, is known as the Fairy, which is F-E-R-I, Fairy, or which is F-A-E-R-I-E, or Fairy, F-A-E-R-Y, or Fairy, F-A-I-R-Y. So there's many differences in spelling. But Victor Anderson is recognized as the founding teacher of Fairy. This is his story. So Victor became legally blind at 4 years old. His physical sight was very limited for the rest of his life. His family moved to Oregon, where he attended the School for the Blind. At age 9, he underwent a mystical experience, which he felt was in his initiation into the magical world. During the 1930s in Oregon, Anderson belonged to the Harpy Coven, which was a pre-Gardnerian group who practiced the craft in the 1920s and 30s. He had many teachers and collaborators from diverse cultures and traditions throughout his life. Anderson was self-taught in physics, chemistry, literature, and indigenous spiritual traditions. He was also an accomplished musician because he played the accordion professionally, and he spoke several languages. He wrote beautiful lyrical poetry. Actually, when he met his wife, he believed that he met her on an astral plane many times, and they were married 3 days after they met in person for the first time. So Victor Anderson and his wife and several others formed the Mahilani Coven in California in the early 1970s. The Fairy, F-E-R-I, tradition reached full fruition as this coven evolved. Fairy is a tradition of power, mystery, ecstasy, and direct communication with deity. The rituals and practices are extraordinarily diverse, incorporating African, especially Dahomean and Haitian, African American, Appalachian, Celtic, Hawaiian, Huna, and Tibetan beliefs and practices. We're going to get into Fairy a little bit more in chapter 10. So the fairy tradition has actually infused Wicca with poetry, daring, courage, honor, and wild spirit. So now we get to what took place in the 1970s. So in the 1970s, Wicca spread and evolved in the United States, becoming much more diverse. Books were now able to be published that outlined various forms of Wicca. These publications provided information that allowed more people to practice as solitaries, alone, or until joining covens. So many Wiccans prefer to practice alone in the private of their own home with their own altar, their own rituals, their own experiences. They don't practice with other people. Then other Wiccans choose to join a coven. And some people join a coven for many reasons, to share knowledge, to basically create a circle where if your energy isn't enough to get done what you want to get done, then you want to impart the energy of others to come together as a group to put out a collective boost of positive energy. So prayers or ritual or dance or shamanic work. So now that this bookwork was coming out in the 1970s, it opened a door for much more rapid growth in Wicca. Feminism and the women's movement also had a profound effect on it as well, because we relate ourselves to the feminine divine. So back in the 70s, a new tradition of Wicca was born out of feminism and the women's movement. Many women helped to launch this tradition, but Zsuzsanna Budapest was widely considered to be the founder. Zsuzsanna Budapest was a hereditary witch. She came to the United States from Hungary when the Soviet Union invaded her country. By the early 1970s, she developed a goddess-centered, woman-centered tradition of Wicca. She based her tradition on feminist principles and the ritual, folk magic, and healing practices of her mother. Now, there are two differences, though, between her and Gardner. So a central theme of Gardnerian Wicca is polarity, which is the balance of the male and the female energy. But the Budapest tradition rejects polarity, and it's goddess-centered only. Or Dianics practice the craft with women only. So basically, the Diana portion of the craft only worships the female portion of the deity. Dianics also believe that men do not belong in Wicca. So in 1971, Budapest founded the Susan B. Anthony Coven No. 1 of Los Angeles, which served as a role model for many other of the Dianic covens. Today, Dianic has become a collective term for any person or group that emphasizes the goddess and whose spirituality and practice are woman-centered and or based on feminist values and principles. Some are no longer women only, as required by the original Budapest feminist Dianic tradition. So how has Wicca been redefined? As feminism and the women's movement gained momentum, many women were searching for a spirituality of liberation based on principles of equality. Starhawk had been initiated into the fairy tradition by Victor Anderson, and she has blended many elements of that tradition with the feminism and creativity of the Dianics. Reclaiming offers an alternative to the separatism of the Dianic movement and the traditionalism of the Gardnerians. Over the years, Starhawk has produced many must-read books on the craft. Her books have been widely read throughout the English-speaking world, and her impact on Wicca is boundless. She's also a courageous, insightful, and wise political activist and a role model for many Wiccans. So in the same year that The Spiral Dance was published, another pivotal book helped redefine Wicca and introduce it to the general public. Margot Adler published her book, Drawing Down the Moon, and it actually gave the general public the facts about paganism and dispelled all the stereotypes. If you want to truly learn about Wicca and witchcraft, these are the first two books that you want to read because they will give you the insight that you need. So Adler's book has become the source book on the history, beliefs, and lifestyles of the new paganism. Thanks to her diligent reporting, the public now has a more accurate view of what paganism really is. The publication of those two books by Starhawk and Adler introduced Wicca to the general public and helped Wicca evolve from its predominantly Gardnerian roots. These books are responsible for much of the growth of Wicca since their publications and still are considered to be today. So that chapter was all about the history of Wicca. How did we get this book? How did we get the information for it? How did Margot Adler get the information that she needed to write her book? How did Starhawk get the information she needed to write her book? We've gone through that history now. So now in the next chapter, we're going to take a look at the contemporary Wicca, which is basically living as a Wiccan today. How do we deal with that? If you've been following me so far, I appreciate you immensely. Please give me a like, a follow, and a share.